All right, we're going to get into this program because we've got a very special guest. And Dr. Paul Hauser, well, what can you say about Dr. Paul Hauser? We could say a lot. I think most of us who have ever worked for the government could tell you that the most important thing a government official can have is integrity. I guess you can talk about other things too, like dependability and courage. Well, Dr. Hauser has all those things. Now, don't be deceived by he looks kind of a young guy. He's got a lot of time as a scientist, over 20 years. And he's not only a man of integrity, but he stood up against his superiors and Department of Reclamation and Interior in particular as a scientific advisor and employee, and said, look, what you're doing is not right, because the scientific integrity and accuracy and the information that you have in this report to justify dam removal cannot be verified and cannot be substantiated by scientific data or studies. So what he did is he stood up against a big bureaucracy, Department of Interior and the Secretary. And I don't want to tell his story, except I think that he is such an outstanding representative of not only the United States of America, but also the government, and also proves that there are a lot of hardworking, honest people that work for government that are willing to stand up. Are there not enough of them? No. But we have one right over here to my left and to your right. And I'm going to read some of his qualifications. Paul Hauser, PhD. His expertise is in water cycle dynamics and land surface hydrology. I cannot mention all the publications that he has had a part in writing or basically disseminating to the scientific community, but there are numerous. Things like the South American Land Data Assimilation System, a study of land surface processes using land surface models over the Little River Experimental Watershed in Georgia, evaluation of the AMSCR soil moisture results using the in situ data over the Little River Experimental Watershed, also in Georgia, impact of the land surface conditions on the North American monsoon, land atmosphere coupling during 2004 North American monsoon, land data assimilation with statistical estimation and correction of model errors. And I could go on and on and on, but he's a well-established, tenured scientist, and he also has published his works in many professional publications, which lends great credibility and weight to what he's going to tell you tonight. He also did the enhancements for California Nevada River forecasting centers, stream flow forecasting by high resolution data assimilation, and assessing a satellite era perspective of the global water cycle. You know, he's done so much it kind of makes your head hurt reading all this. Some of the research he's done is and some of his credentials, he's a present associate professor at George Mason University, a very distinguished university in Fairfax, Virginia. And again, he specialized in geography and geoinformation science department, and he works with Atmosphere, Ocean, and Earth Science Department. He's a present director of hydrometeorology of the Earth Water Global in Arlington, Virginia. He's an adjunct research scientist, Center for Research on Environment and Water, Calverton, Maryland. He's a director, the Center for Research on Environment and Water. He's affiliate faculty member, the Department of Atmospheric, Oceanic, and Earth Sciences, George Mason University. And he was the head at the GS-15 level, which is a very high level in government, Hydrological Sciences branch of the Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland. So he has dealt with rocket science. He's a visiting senior scientist for NASA headquarters, Washington, D.C., and a research scientist for NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. He's taught classes in Principles of Hydrology at the University of Arizona, Land-Climate Interactions at George Mason University, the Hydrosphere at George Mason University, Cold Land Processes and Atmosphere Interactions Special Topics course, George Mason University, and the Equivalent Water Thickness Analysis Special Topics course at George Mason University. He's got a undergraduate degree, a graduate degree, and a PhD from University of Arizona. Some of his awards. He's a Fulbright Senior Specialist Candidate. He was a NASA Software of the Year Award recipient in 2005. He earned the NASA Space Act Award Land Information System Software version 4.0 award. He earned the Presidential Early Career Award for Scientists and Engineers in 2000. The Goddard Space Flight Center Special Act Award was conferred upon him in 97, 99, 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003, and 2004. He's an American Geophysical Union Hydrology Section Outstanding Student. That's one in his younger days in 96. National Aeronautics and Space Administration Fellow in Global Change Research, 92 to 95. He's a National Science Foundation graduate, a fellowship in 1992. He's a Department of Energy Environmental Restoration and Waste Management Scholarship recipient, 1990. And to top it off, he was an Eagle Scout. And he got one more award. He's a hero of Siskiyou County. Dr. Hauser.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much. So, I don't have to talk about my qualifications. But let me tell you a little about my history so you can get an idea of where I'm coming from. So, I decided when I was in 8th grade to be a hydrologist. I went to a career day. I was interested in maps, and I went to go visit the USGS, and they said, why do you want to study geology when you could study water? They were, it was the Water Resources Division of the USGS in Portland I had visited, and from that point I decided what I was going to do when I grew up. I'm still trying to figure that out, actually. But, so from there I went to the University of Arizona, got my bachelor's degree and my PhD there, and then I got the opportunity to go to NASA, worked there for 8 years, and I also, in 2005, went to George Mason University, and I did various other things during that time, started some research centers and whatnot. In 2011, I got an opportunity to work with Bureau of Reclamation. So I saw an advertisement for a senior scientist position, and I had always kind of wanted to do research that made a difference. So instead of the typical academic route, where professors write papers, do the publish or perish kind of thing, I wanted to do research that went beyond writing that paper and actually helped society make better decisions about water. So I saw this opportunity with reclamation. I had worked with reclamation scientists in the past, and I knew that they were a little bit backwards. So I thought, how about if I go and try to make a difference there? So I applied for this job. I took a leave of absence from the university, and I'm glad I did because I needed that afterwards. And I went and applied and won the position of the science advisor or the top scientist at Bureau of Reclamation. Just to give you a bit more about my background, as the sheriff pointed out, I have a fair number of credentials. I've written lots of papers. I've mentored many students and led large teams. So at NASA, I had a team of 75 people, scientists working for me. At the university, I've had teams of 15 or 20 students and postdocs doing research. So I've been able to work in some pretty diverse agendas. I've also had opportunities to work with the private sector. So I've worked in helping to develop water resources in Africa and the Middle East. So I've had quite a bit of international exposure as well. So let me tell you about reclamation. So I was the senior scientist, essentially the science advisor for reclamation. I was the only scientist in the DC office. So reclamation, as you know, mostly works in the West. And I was one of 70 people east of the Mississippi working in the DC office and the only scientist there. I was hired to advise the commissioner on science issues. I was also hired to be the scientific integrity officer. So it was a new position that they asked me to write policy about scientific integrity and how to enforce that, also to educate people about scientific integrity. And then I was also in charge of peer review, which is a way of checking science, as well as data stewardship as a way of making sure that the government takes good care of the data it collects and makes that freely available and easily available to the entire community to double check their work. So I started in April 2011, and everything went fairly well. I had a number of tours and trips trying to learn the role and try to get the understand what all the different projects of reclamation do, and it's a pretty vast organization, 5,000 employees spread across the western United States. One of those trips brought me to this region, so I spent some time in Northern California. I toured all the dams that are slated for removal on the Klamath River. I went on a tour with reclamation scientists as well as Pacific Corps scientists, and I felt I got a pretty good idea, kind of an insider's view of what the science really was from the grassroots level within the organization. I also reviewed quite a few documents, read some of the reports of the panels that met to review science last summer. And I also got exposure to other rivers with similar issues. So I visited the Trinity and the San Joaquin, as well as the Colorado, and quite a few others that are engaged in different aspects of river restoration. So that's essentially who I am and how I got to September 15th of 2011. So on September 15th, 2011, I was sitting in my office minding my own business when a press officer, a relatively low-level press officer, came to my office and said, I have this press release that I just have a big concern about scientifically. I'd like you to take a look at it. So I took a look at it, and based on what I knew about the Klamath, it was completely unacceptable. It raised all kinds of red flags with me about how optimistic it was. It was essentially titled, removing the Klamath dams will have great economic benefits for society and create all kinds of jobs and do great things for the fish. So that wasn't my understanding. My understanding was there was all kinds of uncertainty in the science and that there was a lot of unknowns, a lot of things we didn't know, and a lot of risks in taking those dams out. So I complained. I said to the press officer, I said, I think we have a problem here. She brought it to her boss, and I went with her. Her boss said, this was the press officer for reclamation, and he said, this is above my pay level. This is not a press release that we wrote. And so he asked me to bring it to a higher level. So I brought it to the press secretary of the Department of Interior, and he had an interesting response. He said, I don't want you to email this to me, your concern. I want you to give me a hard copy, but I don't want you to create discoverable documents. Essentially documents that are discoverable under the Freedom of Information Act. And that really struck me as dishonest and not in the nature of what my job was or what I should be doing as a servant of the U.S. citizens. I was under the understanding that we should do everything transparently and in the public trust. So this really struck me strangely. I also talked with the Office of the Solicitor, which is basically the lawyers that it turns out this article and the summary of science that I was reviewing was written by the solicitor's office, the group of the government that kind of is lawyers to defend the government. So what I was reviewing was a press release like I described, but it also had a summary of science findings that was attached to it that wasn't going to go out in the press release, but had a big title at the top, secretarial decision process, and it really appeared that it was a summary for the secretary and the public of here's what the science says. And it said a number of things that were just didn't seem right to me, so I can go through those. I'm going to refer to my notes slightly here. So the first thing that it talked about was that the summary said Chinook salmon recovery is projected at 81.4%. I was concerned about that number, first of all, because there's so many unknowns and so many uncertainties. How can you get 81.4%? Why not 81.3%? If I got that answer on a test from my students at my university, they wouldn't get a very good grade because they would know that that implies a very high precision and certainty in that number. Even if I had seen 80%, I would be surprised. I think the number at this point, I would be amazed to see that it's more than likely that there'll be an increase in Chinook salmon. But 81.4% is pretty amazing. It turns out that Nature magazine, Scientific American, looked into this and wrote an article about this number recently and found that it's based on an unpublished report, unpeer-reviewed report that was released the same day as this press release. And it said that the uncertainty was somewhere around 800%. So, this particular statement also said nothing about the 9 contingencies summarized in the expert panel report last summer that said unless a whole bunch of other things got fixed in the Klamath, that there really wouldn't be any impact on Chinook salmon, including water quality issues, reduction in disease, enabling free migration to the upper basin past Kino Dam, hatchery, also that hatchery salmon don't overwhelm spawning grounds, that predation is sufficiently low, climate change impacts in terms of temperature are mitigated, that reductions in fall flows are mitigated, that there's and that neglecting these different impacts would mean that the Chinook salmon recovery would be quite in doubt. So by omitting all of those contingencies, I believed that the article and the scientific summary was spinning a positive picture, and that's what I was raising concerns to my bosses about. So in addition, one of the things that the summary stated was that coho salmon would reclaim 68 miles of habitat. And that's true. If you take out dams, at least those 4 dams, they can go up to the 5th dam, the Kino Dam, before they can't go any further. So they would get access to 68 miles of habitat. That sounds great, doesn't it? But the expert panel report in April last year said they thought the difference between the proposed action and current conditions is expected to be small, especially in the short term. So essentially the expert panel was saying, sure, they'll get access to the 68 miles of habitat, but they're not expecting it to have much influence on salmon population. So by omitting that, I felt that they were spinning the science to the best possible solution. Going on, the summary also stated the dam removal will likely reduce salmon disease, but doesn't say anything about the uncertainties of that. The uncertainties were expected to be very high, according to the expert panel reports. Also, the summary spins an optimistic look for steelhead trout, providing access to 420 miles of historical habitat. But again, the Klamath River expert panel summaries said that this success would be dependent on effective implementation of all of those proposed actions, including mitigation of the total maximum daily loads, or TMDLs, which I've learned since then are actually naturally occurring in this part of the basin. So it has to do with water quality. So there's issues with water quality that would need to be mitigated in order for the steelhead to recover, and that water quality issue has been found to be mostly derived from the volcanic nature of the geology in the Upper Klamath. So mitigating that would be next to impossible. Anyway, so that was essentially a summary of my concerns on this one document. So recognize this was only a two-sentence or a two-paragraph press release and a page-long summary of conclusions. And that's what my initial disclosure was about. So it turned out my boss, my direct supervisor, was out of town the day that this all happened. And when she got back the next Monday, I went into her office and told her about the situation. And I thought she'd be quite supportive of me doing my job. Instead, I got, well, you know, the secretary really wants to remove those dams. So you've made a poor decision in putting your disclosure forward. Additionally, I found out in this process that I'm not very good at following directions. And I actually emailed my disclosure to a whole bunch of people. So she wasn't very happy about that and she gave me a lecture again about creating disclosure or discoverable documents and the Freedom of Information Act, and warned me that I might be finding myself in a congressional hearing. So actually at this point I'm hoping that I do, because I think it would be a nice way to publicize this further. So time went on from that. That happened in September. And things changed for me pretty radically. So within the next week, I was told that my position had been changed. So originally, when I was hired, my position was a permanent position. My offer letter said it was a permanent position, said nothing about a probationary period, which the government can put on the first year of an employee's term. I had a whole bunch of previous federal experience, and this was a fairly high-level position, so I thought that I had been hired without a probationary period. Well, they told me that there was an administrative goof, and 10 days after I filed this disclosure, my position was changed to a probationary period. So from that point on, I got a poor performance review, basically saying that I wasn't a team player in terms of fulfilling the missions of the Department of the Interior, and that I had made poor choices in what I had chosen to bring forward. In my performance review appraisal, we specifically talked about this issue, and my boss said this was a major concern of hers, that she had, quote, lost trust in me. And that was hard to take. I've had a pretty good scientific career. I know that I'm a good scientist. I'm internationally known. I've never had a bad review. You heard all those awards that I got at NASA. So this was a shock to me, getting this poor review. So it went on from there. I had almost all of my travel was denied. For example, my position, because I was in DC and reclamation is mostly in the West, I needed to travel to go and interact with the reclamation scientists. My position was defined as a 25% travel position. I traveled 26% prior to September 16th or 15th. Between September 15th and when I was terminated in February of 2012, I traveled 4% of the time. So a major, they really clamped down. They didn't want me to go out and communicate with the staff. Additionally, I requested training and mentoring. So I wanted to make the situation better. I wanted to work with my boss to find a way to keep my job. And my boss told me that she would help me with that. I had weekly meetings with her, and every meeting I said, what can I do better? Or do you have any concerns? How am I doing? And she said, you're doing fine, and I can't think of anything to help you improve. or I can't think of anything that you need to improve on. And so that was the response on every meeting. There was some other issues, but essentially I just felt stifled and confined. I wasn't able to do the job I went there to do. On February 6th, I was called into my boss's office. There was a witness there, and she told me that they gave me 2 days to decide to resign or be terminated. So then I had whistleblower training. I knew that I had a case, and so I went and talked to the Office of Special Counsel, which is a group of lawyers in most government agencies that oversee the way that the government works. So they're kind of, they check and are independent review of the government agency. So I talked to them. I was interviewed by them extensively over those 2 days, and they thought I had a pretty good case, and they encouraged me to work it out with my bosses. I tried to do that over the next 2 weeks. I was on administrative leave for 2 weeks after that point. And I specifically asked that I want to resolve this scientific integrity issue with regards to the Klamath River Basin science reports. And my bosses were silent. They did not engage in this. I knew they received it. At one point they asked for more information, but they weren't interested in working it out. So my position was terminated on February 26th, and on that date I filed 2 complaints. I filed a complaint of scientific integrity or scientific misconduct with the Department of Interior. I also filed a whistleblower complaint with the Office of Special Counsel. So that was on the 26th of February, Friday. On Monday, the Secretary of the Interior delayed his decision on Klamath Dam removal indefinitely. So he cited that Congress didn't give him authority to remove or to make the decision, but the coincidence, if I'm a scientist, the correlation is perfect. So I certainly think that I had something to do with that. So I'm glad that we have a chance to try and work out some of these issues and find a way to find a better solution to this problem. I'm optimistic that we'll be able to, but I'm not quite sure what we do next. So I hope we'll talk about that some. My decision, I want to talk a bit about my decision for putting those 2 complaints forward. So it was a hard one. I spent 2 weeks really doing a lot of praying, doing a lot of consulting with my parents, trying to figure out what the right thing to do was. And I wanted to make sure, being a Christian, wanting to not be selfish, I wanted to make sure that if I went forward on this, I wasn't doing it because it somehow benefited me. I wanted to make sure I was doing it for some selfless reason. And I came up with 2. One of them is just the scientific integrity, that the public needs its civil servants, its scientists to do science that the public can trust. And I feel that by putting my allegations forward, that I'm helping to push the government and the process in that direction. Secondly, I'm concerned about the next person who has my job. So whoever has my job next will probably face the same kinds of issues I did, and I hope that this process might free them up a bit to actually speak their mind and do the right thing. Additionally, it's occurred to me that there's a whole lot of scientists in the government that are doing good work and are afraid to come forward with these kinds of truths because they're afraid the same thing will happen to them that happened to me. So perhaps through my process, they will get confidence. They will realize that there is a way for scientists to have integrity and tell the truth and have the public trust. So that's my hope, and that's my motivation for doing this, and it took me a long time to come to that. There are potentials that I could see a benefit from this, but that's not why I'm doing it. The best thing that I could have happen out of this the situation of making these complaints to the government would be to get my job back. And I'm not all that interested in that. It would be a rather poisoned environment. It was a poisoned environment when I was there. I'm not sure if that's how I want to spend my career, but if I did get it back, I might have to think about it seriously because I could still make a difference there. But meanwhile, I'm going to try to make a difference in terms of promoting scientific integrity and hopefully changing the way the government works so that we can really trust it. So since this has all happened, I also forwarded my complaints to a number of members of Congress as well as boards of supervisors, and I've gotten some public attention. So I certainly appreciate that. It wasn't necessarily my intention to go public with this, but it's probably the best thing that could have happened because you're all here listening to me, and it helps me to put this agenda forward. In terms of what's happened beyond the secretarial determination being delayed, I also have heard that the Department of Interior is formally investigating my allegation. So they are hiring an outside panel. I'm guessing it will cost them, $50,000 to $75,000 to hire outside scientists to independently review my claims. And by the way, in my claim, I grabbed some documents off the Siskiyou County website, some letters that the Board of Supervisors have sent, also with concerns about science in terms of the dam removal, and included those in my claim. So, so I'm hoping that they take it seriously. I think they are taking it seriously, and they're pushing that forward. I'm expecting to hear a response about the scientific misconduct probably in a few months. Also, the Office of Special Counsel, in terms of the whistleblowing, is still investigating it. They've been investigating it for 2 months. So at least they haven't dismissed it. It means they are taking it seriously, and they are, it's not just a trivial thing that they can easily throw out. So I'm hoping this will go forward, and probably at this point, prayer would be appreciated. That's about all I have in terms of the current response, where I'm at right now. Let me talk a little bit more about, I often get asked the opinion of, well, what do I think about dam removal? Because I didn't actually say whether I'm in favor or against dam removal. I'm principally wanting the government to make good decisions based on sound science. And what I've seen in this example is the decision has clearly already been made, and they're doing science to support that decision or justify that decision. Let me talk a little bit more about that in terms of biased science. I've also been asked whether I thought the science in the draft EIS, EIR, the environmental impact reports, was good science. And that's hard to necessarily come to a clear conclusion on, because scientists are often biased based on who they're paid by. Let me just give an example. So when I got my first job out of college, I got this job offer from NASA, and I told my professor at Arizona, I got this great job at NASA, and he said, congratulations, but I need to warn you that the only reason why NASA has scientists is to justify putting junk in space. And that put it into perspective for me a bit, and that is generally true. So NASA is a big engineering organization. Their mission is to put stuff into space and do things with space. So I got the opportunity to do science of many different kinds of how you can use sensors from space to observe rainfall and snow and all kinds of things. And I really believe those kinds of things can make a difference in the way that we do science. However, there's also opportunities in that case, to misuse. So I had an opportunity to look at a mission concept. It would be about a $500 million mission to measure stream flow from space. So using a laser or a radar to bounce off water bodies and find out how high they are. It sounds kind of cool, but it turns out this is a really expensive mission. It's a hard mission to do, like I said, about $500 million. Well, it turns out a strain gauge on the side of the river is about $10,000. So we can put many, many, many strain gauges out for the cost of this satellite mission that will only last a couple of years. But that wasn't my job, to point out that maybe we should give some of the NASA money over to another agency to put more strain gauges out. So you can kind of get an example how I could do perfectly good science, but I'm doing science that's paid for. Somebody's telling me to do science to, meet a certain goal. And so I'm not necessarily going to look at all of the alternatives. I'm not going to consider all of the options, and I may not be doing science that's in the public trust. And that happens all the time to scientists. That happens when consultants are hired by the government. That happens when companies hire scientists to find oil or to do to develop new pharmaceuticals or whatever. They're hired with a goal to produce some, profit for that company or to meet some agenda item. And then we don't get the kind of unbiased science we need for making the decisions we need to make. So answering the question of whether good science is in these documents is maybe not the pertinent issue. It's whether we have the breadth of science we need to make an informed decision. Have we studied all the options? Do we have a good way to weigh whether or not dam removal or bypasses or fish ladders or some other option is the best solution for this? And are we also after the right things? Are we balancing an approach that preserves habitat but also protects the economy? So let me talk about my opinion on dam removal. So sometimes I get asked, what do I think about removing the dams? And in terms of science, dam removal is a uncontrolled experiment. So it's if you think about the scientific method, if you learned it in grade school, usually you have a control and an experiment, and you compare the two. You say, well, I'm going to take a vial of water and do nothing to it and see what happens. I'll take a vial of water and add a drop of acid and see what happens, and I can compare the two and see what the difference is. And then I can clearly make an assessment of what my action had on that sample. In the case of dam removal, we don't have a control. So we say, okay, we think the best option is to remove the dams, we take them out, and then we start an uncontrolled experiment that we don't know the outcome of. We don't know what will happen if we did nothing. And so for me, taking the dams out is the most extreme option. It's an option that would could have an impact, but would be the last thing that you would choose. So for me, if your goal was to restore fishery habitat, you would start by looking below the dams. You would start by doing things like finding ways to do experiments that said, well, what if we moved a truckload of fish around the dams and see what they did? Track them and see if they were successful in finding habitat above the dams. You would do things like, can we use the dams to improve the migration and the habitat below the dams? So dams have cold water pools in them that are very beneficial for fish. They also have abilities to clean up the water quality. So some of the poor water quality above the dams is actually mitigated through the dams. They also can help mitigate flows, so we can have less high of flood events and less severe droughts, and we can actually help the fish by managing the dams in a more optimal way. So for me, I think I'd like to, as a scientist, I'd like to understand more about those less severe options. I'd like to see, can we achieve some of the goals we have without blowing the dams up. So that's my opinion on the bias science. I'm not actually sure how long I've taken. In terms of what we need next, I'd like to see that we have a way to develop science in these kinds of endeavors that we can actually trust. How can we get the government to put forward science that is transparent and clearly looks at all the options and that we can have a trust in as the public? I also want to see if we can find ways to enhance that through independent peer review, but also looking at all the alternatives. So right now, based on the KBRA and KHSA, any alternative that doesn't involve removing dams isn't even considered by the Department of Interior. So that's a problem. There needs to be a way to consider other options that don't involve dam removal, but also meet the objectives. This is an important issue because we're talking about a very expensive proposition. It could cost at least $1 billion, and some estimates say about $4 billion once all of the recovery and efforts are put forward. Another thing that I'm constantly asking myself is why, what's the motivation for all this? Why is the government pursuing this agenda so forcefully? You know, I was just asking myself in the last few days, why is the Secretary of the Interior so insistent on this agenda when he actually comes from a ranching background in Colorado and has had a policy in the past of diverting rivers and building dams and doing development? How has he all of a sudden changed to this environmentalist trying to take out dams and restore rivers once he became the Secretary of the Interior? And then that's just the tip of the iceberg. So why are all these agencies kind of look like they're colluding towards going after dam removal in such an aggressive way? And initially I came to just two possibilities. One is there's a policy agenda. So there's a policy in the government for environmental restoration, for river restoration. It could be to do with the America's Great Outdoors initiative. But I think there's a desire by the Department of Interior to create a legacy of restoring streams and rivers. But also I think it probably has something to do with money. So we're looking at gigantic amounts of money. And we're also looking at Pacificor, the owner of the dams, getting essentially a gift from the taxpayers in this situation. So the agreement caps their liability. And any costs above about $400 million is the responsibility of the taxpayers. So if I were Pacificor and saw these liabilities, eventually they're going to have to do something about these dams. They're going to have to retrofit them, improve them, take the sediment out of the reservoirs. If it's not now, it could be 50 years from now. They may need to do some mitigation on the dams in the future. If they can get a huge gift from the taxpayers, why not now? So that could be just the tip of the iceberg, but with these amounts of money involved, I think that that's an obvious motivation.